Hello, I'm Eagle, and welcome to the Wormhole 2.0 week, episode 2. Hopefully, you guys have had a great week and ready to learn a little bit of organics with these great people here. Of course, you should know Medically
Hello,
Fit.
I'm Eagle, and welcome to the
This guy in the
2.0
background.
week, episode
Jeez.
2.
Why you guys give me the mic? Mr. Smiley's Gardens.
I was muted, so I didn't do the same shit.
Butchering this already, boys. Thank you for joining me tonight. I very much value your time. How you guys doing this week?
Doing good, man. It's Friday, dude. TGIF. Long week over with. A lot of fucking shit handled. Good. Let's do this.
Yeah,
Talk
man.
some plants.
Yeah, I'm doing good too. I had a long last couple of weeks. I've been sick, but I'm on the other side of it now. It's starting to get better. I had a long, hard work day today, but it was gorgeous out, and glad to be in here for some plant talk and soil talk.
Right? It's all pressure now. He goes like, man, make it, educate you guys in 101, the whole download, one shot. Let's do this. I don't know.
Yeah, this episode is slightly thrown together, but I have faith it will still be a great episode. Mr. Medically Fit, I don't know if you can hear us yet, but how are you doing this week, sir?
Oh, let's see. This week, temperatures are dropping below freezing, so I've got to start cutting plants down sooner than expected. I've also noticed that plants are starting to just kind of change the senescence of it, going to the purpling, getting it really coming out in the plants. So it kind of sucks that we're getting these low temperatures overnight that it might really cause some harm to my plants.
Yeah, turn shitty quick, that's for sure. Yeah. Hopefully you get all that taken care of. So this week, I guess you guys like talk about a little bit about nitrogen, NPK. What's obviously one of the most important, or some will say most important nutrients in the plant process there. So you guys want to talk about some of the sources of where it comes from? Where do we start this off at? Where you guys want to kick it off? The nitrogen, carbon, are you?
So why don't we start at just like compost and the importance of like or what the carbon and nitrogen ratio or mix to get a compost thermophilic versus a cold one, and then maybe we could explain how that carbon and nitrogen ratio also is maintained in living things too.
So there's a couple different ratios, but when it comes to like composting, Dr. Lanningham really talks like a 4-to-1 ratio of 4 browns to every 1 nitrogen. So when you're doing your fruits, your vegetables, and you're trying to compost that, all of that counts as green. None of it's brown. And that's one thing that we don't seem to comprehend sometimes, that we're adding too many greens and not enough browns to our soil.
And even in that terminology, greens and browns, the definitions there are actually a carbon to nitrogen ratio as well. The browns I know are like really high, 30 to 1, 50 to 1, some 100 to 1. And some of the greens are categorized in like, I think it's like under a 10 to 1 or something like that. It's considered in that.
Well, and soil itself, it tests around like 5 to 1 to 15 to 1, depending on different parts of country or world. Some of it can probably even be less, and some of it can be higher. I'm sure if anybody knows who Gabe Brown is, he's one of the big guys in regenerative agriculture, and the amount of biomass carbon he puts in his ground every year, I'm sure he has a much higher ratio than what people are expecting. Probably like a 20, 25 to 1 ratio.
I would agree with that, and I think maybe this is the point, is to remind ourselves that not all the nitrogen has to come from the soil either. Like what Gabe Brown is doing is he's really accelerating that biology in the soil for sure, but he's also accelerating those rhizobacter, those nitrogen fixing bacteria. And man, what a powerful tool. Let's not forget the air is 78% nitrogen. That's right there around the plant all the time, around the stomata, just like the CO2 and the oxygen is. That's much.
Pretty eye-opening fact alone right there, my friend.
Well, so when we're going to carbon, nitrogen, and we're looking at different ratios uptake, last week we were talking about carbon as one of the elements that we add to our super soil through these amendments. And a lot of these amendments are carbon based. So when we're making our super soil, we're actually allowing time for the biology to start breaking down this carbon and nitrogen over time, leaving it plant ready available. And that's kind of why we do a super soil, is we want carbon and not just a salt-based nutrient, but a carbon-based nutrient. There's a lot more that we can go into it, but we've got a lot of other topics to continue on with this carbon.
Speaking of carbon, just momentarily, that ties into humates and a whole bunch of other pieces there. But let's just say, for simplification, carbon is great for filter and also great for holding water on a microscopic level, where we might not be able to sense that moisture with our fingers, but on a microscopic level, there's water there. And the other thing is, I had another point, but I forget what it was. But,
well, let's discuss what some carbon sources are. Like, besides the down to earth amendments, we also have the biochar, which is a source of carbon. We have wood chips and any mulch are sources of carbon. Any brown leafy material that the green is out of it and it's fallen is usually a carbon. Human bodies are a source of carbon. Like any type of biomass really is a source of carbon.
So it's living things are carbon based, right? So yeah, if we get that mixture and the compost of 4-to-1, so now we got our browns and our greens mixed, we watered it down, that becomes, it starts to heat up, and that's a biological process of the bacteria starting to really reproduce, and in that reproduction they're breaking down the carbon and the nitrogen, and they're using some of those materials for their bodies to grow, but they maintain a really low carbon and nitrogen ratio. So as those bacterial colonies grow, there's predators that can come along, like protozoa, ciliates, amoeba, different things eat these bacteria, but they all have a different carbon and nitrogen ratio. And this, for whatever reason, just tripped me out, is that like a protozoa may have a carbon and nitrogen ratio of like 3-to-1, where bacteria is like 1-to-1. So now it's got to consume, the 3 bacteria to make the carbon that it needs, but it has to excrete this extra nitrogen, and that's the waste product, right? So like a lot of manures will be that way. That's why they're a higher nitrogen source in a lot of cases, because that animal or organism's got to maintain its own carbon and nitrogen ratio, even when it's consuming, which it has to grow and multiply and all that. So I don't know why, but that was like, to me, just kind of a weird lights on moment, as far as like, it's the nutrient cycling happens at every level, but you have to have all the levels to really make it happen. You can't just have the lowest level of bacteria. You have to have higher levels that are excreting that that waste that is plant available nutrient.
Yeah.
So, and
Everybody.
even like in a compost, that's actually what's also getting used by the other bacteria, and it's getting used at all levels to reproduce and break that material down to a basic form.
Well, and each of their bodies, like the higher the organism in the food chain gets, the more carbon it takes for them to use for their ectoskeleton, their body. So as you get up, what is it like? Protists, then arthropods are like a 7-to-1, and they earthworms, I think 10 to 15-to-1, something like that. Like every one just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then you look at humans, and we're like a 10-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And look how much carbon, not processed foods, but leafy green materials, raw foods and vegetables that we're naturally supposed to eat, carbon sources.
So, is this a safer way to kind of like pre-charge a soil from like having too much of nitrogen available and will like severely burn plants? Can we, pre-charge carbon-based stuff in our soil, and banking on that later in the soil's life to have that nitrogen available? So can we like put extra carbon in there, knowing at some point, yeah, we're going to need a bunch of carbon or a bunch of nitrogen, but
Well,
we need it right now because it'd be too early in the phase. You know what I mean? Seedling, small plant phase, we're more worried about excess nitrogen burning the plant or burning the root system. So could we pre-charge that soil with a bunch of carbon, knowing in like 4 weeks, we're going to have that demand? You know what I mean? We need it.
You can in a form of like biochar, like where it's more of a pure carbon form, and then you can definitely soak that biochar in like a fish hydrolysate with water, whatever, and definitely charge it in a certain way.
but we're going to still have to keep that C to N ratio as best as we can, because if we get too much carbon and not enough nitrogen, then the plants aren't going to really have the nitrogen sources they're looking for. It's just like adding all these down to earth amendments. How I mentioned, we can add actually too much nitrogen by adding all this, because the amount of nitrogen that's in each one, we really don't need all of that nitrogen, and we're adding too much. We're not adding enough carbon to most of our soils and our amendments, especially when we no-till. And what is it, Robisco, how it breaks down stuff so fast that we got to be concerned about it consuming all the carbon sources in the soil.
Well, and that's what they mean by like a hot soil too. That process will start and kick off once you introduce water to it. So now all of a sudden you got your plant you just transplanted in there that just gets cooked alive because all the biological activity started again. The nitrogen, in my opinion, is the one to really keep an eye on in the level of it, because maintaining that ratio or a good ratio can be important, and that's where, like, yeah, if you really start juicing a lot of nitrogen, say in a watering to a soil, you can really shift what's happened in that carbon to nitrogen ratio to where you're kicking up more reactions than you planned on. You become in that thermal range even.
So when we go back to looking at carbon, though, what eats carbon mainly in browns? Fungus. So if we're removing a lot of the carbon sources, wood chips, pulp, big heavier chunks of carbon, what are the fungi going to eat? Like bacteria will eat some of the nitrogen and help change over the ammonia, nitrates, but we don't leave a lot for the fungus then if we're removing some of the carbon sources and not putting enough in there for them to continue to consume and have as a food source. One of the other things was always, when you liquid feed your plants soluble nutrients, they say to add a carbon source to it, so it helps the biology actually uptake and consume it a little bit better than just the liquid nutrients. So to me, it's like when I'm doing amendment tea, I'm making sure I add like sugar to it, a carbon source or something along that line to allow me to get carbon into the water in a sense and not everything be so fully soluble.
Like a humic or a fulvic acid can kind of go with that too.
Yeah, a little bit of fulvic or humic acid. Also, molasses is a nice, like that's like the sugar carbon source plus a little bit of trace mineral nutrition. That just makes biology explode. And I think like we got to remember that we're still trying to keep it through biology, right? Like that's how all of these processes continue to happen and share and exchange energy.
And sugars are interesting because they're actually in a reduced form, where in my mind's eye, as far as oxidation reduction, but to put something in a reduced form, it requires energy. So when something's in a reduced form, it has energy it can release. So when that molecule of sugar is broken down by an enzyme or an oxidation, it releases an energy as well. So it's different than having the carbon in an oxidized form. So as those carbon chains break down too, that sugar broke down, and as it breaks down again, it can actually release some, but it takes a different process to break some of those down. So bacteria can react really fast on sugars, which can be broken down easy. But some of the other carbon sources that are like longer chain or more of a
Polysaccharides, monosaccharide type stuff
to take apart. But it's in my mind's eye, it's a more dense carbon to break apart, and it requires a different process. So and it matters how the carbon was formed. But the point being that different species of biology, like fungi and bacteria, will work at different stages on that. So you can encourage an explosion of a certain type of species by adding a real fast sugar source like that, where like, say, something like a fungus actually requires more of a longer chain, and it's not going to respond as quickly to the sugar as the bacteria. So you can really shift the community in certain cases too. So just to use some caution in some of that.
I don't know about that, because John Kemp says differently. John Kemp pretty much says you can dump and pretty much go bankrupt dumping as much sugar, carbs into your soil as you can, and the plants, they'll have no problem. The biology, no problem with it. And matter of fact, they'll just consume every bit you can put into it, and like you'll go bankrupt trying to continue to feed sugars.
I remember him saying that in several different talks. I've heard him say, like, really, if you want like an easy way to get anything kick started in the spring, man, go out and put down a ton of sugar on it. Even better if it's molasses or something with like other trace mineral nutrients in it. But I also, at the same time, I think you can always go too hard on anything, right? So let's stay in moderation here, because we're trying to lead people into reliable information, right? Not just like we'll show you some leading edge stuff, but also we want to steer you into success, right?
Well, and if you talk about sugars, I mean, they talk about Brix level. Like the higher the Brix level in your plant, the less pest infestation you start to have. And so there's not necessarily been anything negative found upon applying excessive sugar that research has shown yet. The only thing it's showing is excessive levels of Brix.
So I've got a couple of questions when it comes to the sugars here. So a human body is one of them things, you start substituting things that the body naturally does, and the body will quit doing it. So I'm assuming plants aren't so different. So if you start flooding them with sugars, do they get lazy about making their own sugars?
No.
And my next follow up on that is, how come we don't hear more about Brix when we talk about cannabis? Harley Race was the first one I ever heard about really discussing Brix and cannabis, and that's it. That's like seriously like the only one top of my head I can really reference
So
cannabis.
no to the first question. And to the other one about Harley, there's more people now that cannabis is becoming legal, or more and more people are talking about doing testing, bricks level testing. You hear like Dr. James White, and some of these people like Matthew Powers, and people that have gotten into the hemp and cannabis community because they're permaculturalists or they're soil biologists. They're the ones talking about it and bringing it up, that there's not really issues or how to kind of deal with some of that.
Comment on the first question real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So dumping all the sugar and overloading it, right? You got to remember we're dealing with the soil, which is actually the digestive tract of the plant. And in doing so, we're basically what we're mimicking by putting all that sugar on is plant exudates, which are primarily sugars. So the only thing is the plants have the ability to tune those exudates to select the bacteria and fungi sets they want to work with depending on what they need. Whereas if we just go broadcast sugar on, then we're just kind of like throwing a big bomb at it. So, well, back to Smiley's point where he was saying, you could take things out of whack too doing that.
Keep in mind though, plants use carbohydrates for energy sources like ATP. They need to use ATP to produce and help with photosynthesis and other biological process. This is why I talk a lot about Krebs cycle, the Calvin, the acid, what is the acid cycle? There's like 3 different cycles that I kind of talk about, and sugar is a big key component for these plants to really produce some of the energy, ATP, ADP type molecules that it needs.
Well, the ATP turns into ADP, and that released phosphate is the energy source. And that's actually the ATP to be a 3-phosphate is a reduced form. It requires energy to put it in that form. And then it carries in that form until it's released by breaking that bond and making it ADP. Which is kind of cool. I mean, it's part of that like electron transfer chain type thing, but probably
that process is absolutely fascinating, and especially how different key elements play a role in that, like iron and copper and zinc. Maybe at some point in the future we'll get into that.
Eagle, do we make any sense, man, or are we just
Did we answer your question?
jabbering gibberish about some shit? You know what I mean?
I'm putting it together.
We're starting to paint a picture of some type at least. I don't know.
So the human body is different than plants. The human body cannot take in and process all the sugars. Our glucose levels start to have problems, will spike. Some of us become diabetic, type 2, type 1. Where plants, we haven't found some of those issues that we know of.
I think also the context, we should consider the context of this, because like when we say we're talking about John Kemp, we're talking out in like big farm fields. The depth of that soil and the buffer capacity of that soil.
The thousands of hectares.
Yeah. Whereas when you're in a little container, now you don't have, you got 1.5 feet if you're deep, maybe 2, right? And then that's it. Out in the soil, man, like that sugar can work its way down, and there's different communities at different levels, and there's a whole nother ecosystem well beyond what we're trying to mimic in a little container. Just a side note comment.
Yeah, I remember John Kemp saying that you couldn't add enough. You would go broke trying to add enough sugar to keep up with what a cover crop could produce. And that's what I remember him saying, and that it was that the roots actually having roots in the soil and plants photosynthesizing is like puts way more, energy. So like the way I like to think of it in the soil, it's pumping that sun's energy down into the roots, and that is what's feeding on the biology's feeding their energy source from, and so on. You know what I mean? because they always call it sugars is kind of a, I don't know, it's like a real big, broad thing. Like there's a lot of things that are in the category of sugar, you know what I'm saying? So like to just say, oh, sugars is kind of a broad stroke.
Well, anything with the OSE on the last part of the name, lactose, fructose.
Right. And the real
Alcrose,
takeaway
like
from
the-
that is those are all different length chains together. So, you know what I mean? So and they're all sugars, but one might be only a 3 carbon sugar and the other one might be a 15 carbon sugar. You know what I'm saying? So there's different ways that's all put together to put a, you know, mind's eye on it. You know what I mean?
And that's why I talk about using different sugar types. And when you feed your plants, like sometimes I'll use milk, sometimes I'll use brown sugar or cane sugar, sometimes I'll use honey, sometimes I'll use molasses. Like I'm changing up the chain of type of sugars that I use when I'm feeding the plants. And it's never just molasses. I try to do something different each time.
Yeah, and some of the sugars will be a lot more quicker to be able to be utilized. So the longer chain it is, the harder it, I guess in a broad view, the harder it is to break down a larger chain. The smaller ones are easier, so those will react quicker to those things.
So the other carbon source that we haven't talked about is CO2. And the amount of CO2 that's present atmospherically right now around you is like 400 ppm all the time.
Yeah. And since we're on it and we're talking about carbon, let's just talk about how that photosynthetic process and that cover crop thing Smiley was talking about. This whole process is fascinating. Like, I mean, how would I add carbon to the soil if I had my best choice? It'd be through plants growing on that soil. And I'd do multi-species cover crop, and I'd probably put a good drench down at first, and I'd make sure that they were covered in and on those seeds and in and on that soil with all the biology that I wanted to make sure I could have present, including rhizobacter, fungi, all kinds of stuff. I have a trifecta of inoculants I use when I do stuff. And man, it's amazing.
What are you talking about? Growing cover crop indoors is a waste of time. You can't do that properly. I mean, you know how many comments I get about people when I try to do my no-till beds and people talk about, oh, you can't do that. That doesn't do well indoors and it makes no sense. And like, well, it doesn't matter.
Explain why it makes sense, because they're putting that more energy into the soil than you could by even adding it every watering. And it's in a controlled form that's going to stimulate the type of biology that the plants want, not versus, you know, your added source that's going to stimulate whatever, right? Like you really don't know. I mean, some people do or whatever, but like in a very layman sense, it's stimulating something that we don't really realize, and it could kick it out of control, and that's all I was trying to get.
Well, look at Steve Campwell, Green Life Productions out of Las Vegas, and the no-till beds he's doing on a large scale indoor, and the amount of production and the quality of flower he's getting. But yet, because I'm doing a 5x4 bed, I can't do the same thing he's doing in a bigger facility. Bullshit. As long as I'm getting the diversity in cover crop, diversity in soil biology, I'm going to get different genetic potential than the rest of the people that are not doing it. And that's what people don't get, is the genetic potential that these biology, the different diversity creates in our plants.
And let's not forget, John Kemp talks about this on and on and on and on, is that constant growing plants on that soil. You're constantly running that photosynthetic pump, that photosynthetic engine that sequesters energy, carbon, energy, and sugar to those microbes and fires that soil hotter and hotter. So the better it gets, man.
So is there a sweet spot when you're talking about putting a bed together? Is it like a building process? First two are like, one good one, two bad, three you're rocking, or four you're back up and rocking. Is there a sweet spot when you're talking about putting a bed together that it's as diverse as you guys are talking about? Can you get that diversity and all that goodness and from the get, or does it take a little while to get everything to where you want it?
Here's two seed company, Canna Sewer. You can find them online on Instagram. It's 13 different blend seed cover crop. I'm putting different types of clover, different types of flax, peas, buckwheat, chickpeas, lentils. This is nitrogen fixing bacteria, putting nitrogen back in my soil. That's for when my crop is growing. I even have a winter blend to put nutrients back in, creating more holes, keeping root zones and biology alive in the wintertime. Because wintertime, that's where a lot of people that grow outdoors, they let everything die off, and that's not what you want. You want to keep roots in the soil as long as possible. So my no-till bed, I've already dumped seeds just a couple days ago to start them growing through the winter season. It stays warm enough here and next to my house where the sun just warms it up that these plants will grow. I am keeping the cycle going as long as possible. Indoors, it's a little difficult. You may have to change the rotation of what you're growing for cover crop, because some of this cover crop will outgrow your beds, period. And most people do a chop and drop. I do a roll and crimp because I don't want the biology to fully die off. And if you studied like cattle grazing, and if cattle graze the plants to almost nothing, the root zones basically die off, and it takes a long time for the root zone to come back. I'm not trying to destroy the root zone or the rhizobia area. I want them to be there as long as possible. So if I just knock my plant over and bend the top so it kind of dies off and the rest is still there growing, I'm going to keep my root zone longer. And that's what you're trying to do.
My experiences with cover crops, when it hasn't been much, was I could very much see the benefit of the cover crops, but it was always scary to me because of the PM or the IPM side of things. As you put your plants in the garden, I kind of feel like they're already putting out that frequency attracting bugs. Then you add a more diverse system, you know what I mean? And it's more along the lines of adding now a symphony, you're putting out there. And then when you're talking about like nitrogen, high source nitrogen plants, now you're really calling for aphids and shit like that. That's a tornado siren to me.
But the problem with aphids and your pest infestation is too much nitrogen.
Yes.
Not the plants themselves. It's you having too much nitrogen in your soil. And that's what's causing it. It's not so much a toxicity, but it is an excessive that the plant or the bugs are coming to feed off your plant, that are allowing them to get this source of food, sugars, carbs, nitrogen source. And if you have the balance, you're not going to have a lot of these pest problems. You may have some, but when I've done my no-till bed, I literally had one plant that was infested with aphids and none of the other plants were touched. And I checked the plants over, and it was just the one plant because the plant was sick. It had too much nitrogen. It was having problems, and the aphids knew it and only attacked that plant.
I can relate several stories like that, both canna and non-canna. But I will say this, yeah, the excess nitrogen thing, that's what we're back to, right? And like at the end of the day, like you want to really be building all your cell walls with calcium. The nitrogen is kind of like a facilitator, and we tend to get carried away with it because we're always afraid of not having enough of it. But if we set our soils and our biology up right, the plant can get the right amount of nitrogen from that soil and from the air around it without having excess nitrogen. And that's, again, we're trying to get that whole, remember, this is like an equalizer, right? We're trying to like tune this equalizer just right. So that sound is just perfect when it comes to nutrient. That's really where our goal is here.
Shredder. If you don't know what it was, I'm pretty sure it was russet mites, because I noticed that my plants outdoors started getting russet mite infestation. And when you're in flower, there's not much you can do to stop them. Sulfur, micronized sulfur is the only thing that really kills them, but you don't want to spray anything on your plants in flowers. So you either keep hosing them off with ice cold water to try and knock them back so they don't keep attacking, or you try to get your Brix levels up, and it's like a balance. But this year I've seen a lot of people's plants outdoor have infestation problems that they're not talking about.
I got another point I want to touch on while we're talking about that aphids nitrogen thing. If you actually take a plant sap off of the plant, like if you took a big enough plant sample to be able to test its pH, if it's above or below 6.4, it's going to have one or the other type of infestation. I forget which way it goes. I think below you get insects and above you get fungi, powdery mildews, all those sort of things. But it's something to think about. And that goes back again to that nutrient balance. And let me also just say, isn't it interesting? 6.4, isn't that right in our 6.3 to 6.5 soil range for cannabis?
That was another topic that was brought up recently. KISS Organics did a little quick deal asking if pH matters in soil, whether balancing or not. My response is no, it doesn't, because every biology, bacteria, fungus, protists, whatever's in the soil is changing the pH level around the rhizosphere, around their area, to what they need to do to break down the amendments, the nutrients or minerals. Some of it's going to be acidic, some of it's going to be alkaline. So it doesn't matter what you try to do your soil. If you have any type of biology in it, it's going to change the pH levels anyhow.
Another point on that.
Yeah, but you can adjust that so pH in a bulk sense. When you start dumping a bunch of sulfur around or spraying that real frequent, you're going to shift that soil pH. And if you start adding a bunch of lime, you're definitely going to shift that soil pH.
And we're talking about the difference between bulk soil pH and pH directly in the root zone. Bulk soil pH, you kind of want to be in that range, right? Because that sets everything up, the foundation for what we're trying to maintain and operate here, right? But like he said, John Kemp was talking about it, like that right at the root tip, that pH varies tremendously from minute to minute and throughout the day and throughout time, right? It's constantly varying and going through all sorts of crazy ranges. We're not talking like, a couple of points. We're talking like massive changes. So from a microscopic level, that's what's going on, but we're trying to keep our bulk soil in a range where everybody works together and let the plant and the biology actually do that regulation up close. I stopped measuring my soil pH too, but but after I kind of figured out how to do that.
So let's talk a little bit about biocarbonates. Too much type of carbon coming from our water sources.
Can I?
Well, carbonate is like a different form, like on a molecular level. And that's, I guess, in layman to look at it, the way I looked at it is it's put together a different way that's harder to break down, just like thinking of the longer carbon chains. It's those bicarbonates are harder to break down, and they last a long time in the soil. They'll build up in the soil. So as a water source, if you're continually watering, your soil is going to be a filter for that, and it's going to shift that pH of the soil. It's a big deal, really, because it ties up nutrients and can really cause a lot of problems. But it's about the way the molecule is put together.
It's a huge deal, and John Kempf gave a long talk on it at a Soil and Nutrition Conference 2018. I think it was part 2 through NOFA It is available on YouTube. It is worth listening to. And he talks specifically about carbonates and bicarbonates as it applies to foliar feeds, irrigation, and pesticides. And so just to simplify the concept for people, I'm gonna touch on pesticides. So most pesticides are labeled, right, for the maximum amount that they would need to get the effectiveness of that product at the level the effectiveness is supposed to be for this application, say, right? But if you could use either reverse osmosis or pure rainwater that had no carbonates or bicarbonates in it, you could run 15% of that product and get the same effectiveness. And the same for foliar feeds, and the same for the water and nutrient availability in the soil for plants. So I guess that finishes my point.
Yeah, so you might read on your thing that you got calcium, but a calcium bicarbonate is a whole different ballgame. So yeah.
Rainwater, huh? Yeah, biocarbonates, they can be toxic. They can be detrimental to soil biology, and we need to be aware of them, especially from municipal water sources. Or if you're getting certain, how do I want to say, if you buy bottled water to feed your plants, look at the sourcing where it's from, because some of them might be higher in biocarbonates than what your municipal source is. So just be aware of some of the biocarbonate sources coming into your plants.
You prefer actual clean water, do you? I mean, reverse osmosis. I mean, how clean do you prefer the water when you water your plants?
I just use normal tap water for mine, but I'll try to put like hydrogen peroxide in it to help break stuff down, especially chloramine or chlorine. I don't do a lot of reverse osmosis like a lot of people to pull a lot of the sediment out of the. I use a home filtration system, which is going to take out a lot of those biocarbonates out of my water. So I don't really have to worry about having a whole water filtration system on my house. If I didn't have that, then I'd definitely be concerned about like my water source.
I've always taken it as far as like cleaning my water, an RV filter. I've always found works very well for me. I'm not wasting any water. I'm catching a lot of the bad stuff, and I can pull as much water through it as I want to pull. So that's not necessarily a time factor waiting for the RO system or whatever to catch up. I've always been there right there with you too, as far as knowing where my the pH of my water, kind of making sure it isn't too far out of whack. But once I kind of deal with it accordingly. I'm not checking it all the time. My question to you, Carlton, there is, yeah, you were talking about the root system and the tip of the root there, the pH constantly changing all the time. Is that because of the nutrient chart there? The availability is, you know what I mean? Is that changed? I need this now, so I have to take the pH here so I can uptake it properly. Is that the minute to minute? I'm taking a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and to make it available, or is that what's going on at the tip of that root with pH?
Well, first, let me say I don't know that for sure, for certain, but I would say, yeah, that's probably what it is, and it's probably the plant's changing its root exudates based on what it needs and based on which, what it wants for that particular. Like let me back up for a sec. If you follow like a root all the way from the root up into the tip of the plant, that's one long continuous strand, right? So each part of that plant has its own demands based on like how much sun it's exposed to, how much carbon dioxide it's getting, all these other factors, right? So I think that's part of why that's happening. That's like the network between, the sun power and the biology, and that link is like, I think that's what's varying. I really do. I don't remember specifically whether John said that or not, so I'm not going to say anything as a fact that I don't know for a fact. But that would be my speculation, absolutely. And I don't know. I'd love to hear anybody else's input or thoughts on it. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I muted Eagle.
Yeah, muted, and I decided to use the Zoom mute tonight, and my mouse just isn't correlating with where it needs to be. I appreciate that. As kind of pointed out in the beginning of this, you guys are very knowledgeable in what we're talking about. But in the same aspects, these are all talking points, and things, if they interest you, you should be diving into, further. This isn't, take the notes or whatever. This is
We're not Nick from Rooted Leaf dropping like highly intellectual verbiage, so you guys have to like stop, rewind, re-listen, write it down, take notes. We're trying to give you enough information to start sorting and doing some research on a simplified terminology. Like,
he's an awesome dude.
whoever NN is in the chat is dropping like Rooted Leaf Nick type information, which is great.
I'm wondering if it is Nick, because I did drop him a Instagram message there. But he is an awesome dude, man. And while we're on the contact, I'm talking about him. I like the way that he presents his information, very down to earth. It isn't necessary, even though it sometimes is, big terminology. He makes it too easy and understandable. He's a good watch right there, and a great.
And people like me, I want to listen to Nick talk. I listen to his lectures. That's like the next level of where I'm trying to get to understand that information and be able to break it down and simplify it for people that follow us and follow my channel. Like, that's how, not everybody wants to be there, but when you've been in this 10 years and longer, you're wanting to be at those higher levels of information and education compared to somebody that just started growing, I just need to know how to grow.
Let's face it, guys, anything we've been doing for any period of time gets boring. If you're just doing the same thing over and over, you ain't doing nothing new.
Well, it's like, again, to reiterate what I said a few minutes ago, these talking points should be sparking, something in your head that makes you want to dive deeper. Nick's one of them dudes that, cannabis in general, we've been talking about cannabis for a very long time. And how often did you actually hear about carbon in cannabis up until Nick? You know what I mean? He's one of them cats that come on and talked about it and interest a whole fucking community into diving deeper. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, and Nick's one of the few people out there that is on that level. There's not many people in this community on WeedTube putting out that information on that level. And it's great to have them out there, because like, it's hard for me to find people to listen to, because a lot of the people I follow have different, it may be the same lecture, but it's different words in the lecture and they say something a little differently. So I listen to them a lot. Nick's one of those guys that you can listen. It's never the same to me.
I just want to throw this out there. People said the same thing about Smiley when he was doing the takeovers. Cheers, Smiley.
To be honest, man, I enjoy Nick a lot, but he was one of the harder interviews because I had to try to keep up with all the shit he was talking about so I could ask a relevant question afterwards. It was like, I couldn't rewind that shit to rewatch what he just said.
On the fly, eagle eye.
Yeah, it is a lot of information coming at you fast for sure.
It's intense. There's a lot of information in the short sentences he puts out. And it's like listening to when he was on this and the Future Cannabis Project. And oh my gosh, like I try to get as much of Nick as I can through these lectures. And anytime I see a new one pop up, I'm trying to listen to it because there's not that many people out there putting that type of deep information out like Nick is. And it's grateful that we have somebody to be able to help us get to the next level.
So far it sounds to me like placing carbon in the soil is probably the best way to bank it. You know, not only is it kind of putting it there for the future, but it's providing, you know, somewhat of an aeration to the soil itself, like biochar and stuff like that. You know, is that a secondary purpose of, you know, being able to put carbon sources in the soil is like aeration? And I guess when you guys are done answering that, is there a way, is once you've accidentally introduced, say you went down this wormhole and now carbon's your thing, you're dumping all kinds of carbon, shit gets out of whack, is there a way to kind of fix an overload of nitrogen in the soil if you've kind of so I mean, come on, we're human, we're morons, we're always trying to, oh, this is great but it could be greater. So is there a way to, can you take this too far, and is there a way to fix it once you fucked it up?
We're going to stop right off the bat and say, hold on, because nitrogen is affected by a bunch of other nutrients, right? And oftentimes, I know John Kemp was talking about deficiencies in molybdenum and boron and zinc and copper would tremendously limit a plant's ability to.
Wait. Don't talk about heavy metals. You don't want to put heavy metals on your plants. Are you kidding me? Like, people don't get, plants need trace amounts of heavy metals.
So since this has come up again, can I do a screen share for maybe 10 seconds? I got an image that I think will help everybody understand things a little better.
You're always welcome. Just give me a second here so I get over to that screen share. There you go, my friend.
All right, now let me figure out how to grab it. Here we go. Okay. So are you guys able to see it? Oh, not yet. There we go. There we go. So what we have here is the biochemical sequence of nutrition in plants. Get out of the way. Right? So let's just think about this for a minute, right? The whole sequence of nutrition in plants for growth, for cell division, for all of those processes starts with boron. And boron activates silicon, which carries all the other nutrients, starting with calcium, which then binds with nitrogen to form amino acids. So before we ever even got to nitrogen, we had to go through boron and silicon and calcium, right? So then nitrogen forms amino acids, DNA, and cell division. Then those amino acids form proteins, such as chlorophyll, which we need, obviously, and tag trace elements, especially magnesium, which transfers energy through phosphorus to carbon, here we are on carbon, to form sugars, which go where potassium carries them, okay? So just to understand like the bigger picture of what we're talking about here, we're talking about nitrogen or carbon or any of these other pieces. And this is like an excerpt of the periodic table here, so you can kind of see how they scatter.
You should qualify that though, and that's not a chart showing like the needed amounts. You know what I mean? Like boron is a very micronutrient, and you're not going to want to. You only want a certain amount. You're not going to want to just go, oh, boron was on the list, let's add a bunch of that to it. Like it's still a micronutrient. I mean, it's needed.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm by no means indicating that this is how there should be balanced. I just kind of want to illustrate the concept of, you know, what's going on in the plant that we're trying to support, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's it. I just wanted to share that, and we can carry on.
Well,
It is cool.
and
to
that's
look
a
at
great
stuff like
reason.
that. It gets your head thinking, you know what I mean, how all that stuff's playing a role in how a plant's going to grow. It's not like you fully understand all the enzymes and all the things playing a role, but you kind of get it clicking in your head that these things have to be there for these other functions to happen.
And that's why I've talked several times about like some of the trace minerals and nutrients from like azomite, and some of them talk about heavy metals. Well, you know, like if you listen to Dr. Elaine Ingham, she brings up, you know, like lead and arsenic and some of these cobalt and zinc. Like our plants need micrograms of this for certain key functions. And people have a hard time when I'm telling them that, hey, you need some of these heavy metals in your plants. Oh, let me just go dump heavy metals on my plant. Wait a minute. You are completely taking it out of context, and understand the context I'm putting it in. It's micro to nanograms of this, and not like a full gram or tablespoon or any of that.
It's trace amounts, and they're in a specific type of chelation. And I think the last I heard was like there were some 94 trace minerals that they so far have discovered that plants can use in specific enzymatic processes, right? And so yeah, I mean, like, you know, vanadium and like all kinds of crazy stuff that are like radioactive elements are beneficial in very minute amounts. Too much, obviously. And again, you know, like what's the difference between like a drug and a poison? The amount.
When I was doing soil testing, I was just trying to think a minute, but it was iron and manganese that were always coming up on the list. So I had to source those to actually, you know, add to the recipe that I was getting from the soil test or whatever. So I remember that, like, that was a surprise to me. That kind of caught me off guard, because it was like, well, you never, you know what I mean? Some of that shit, like, you would never like diagnose a manganese deficiency, because I was adding like only like two, you know, it was like 2 tablespoons, but that was across like 10 yards, you know what I mean? So like 10 yards of soil or whatever. So it's like very minute amounts, but it had to be there. And on the soil test to maintain the level every time I was kicking that in, it was like the plants were utilizing that out of the soil. So if you're trying to repetitively use a media over and over and over, I really do think that testing might be the way, but you know, just having a mind's eye that some of that stuff really depletes a lot faster than what you're maybe thinking it does. And there was one there on the list, and it wasn't there as frequent as the iron and the manganese. I'm drawing a blank on what that one was. It wasn't a little bit.
Yeah, and iron and manganese those two are very critical for the photosynthetic process, and manganese is part of what joins water in that process, I believe. And I think iron, I forget what role iron plays in that. But yeah, interesting, huh? So then if you're limiting photosynthesis, you're limiting total energy output of the plant. You're
limiting the genetic potential of your plant, right?
Potential of the plant, and it goes on and on and on. Really, like it's a lot more complex than it sounds.
Oh, I remember it was copper. It was blue, copper.
When I did my plant sap analysis on my tomato crop a few years back, it was copper, molybdenum, boron, zinc, manganese. You know, same ones. And I thought, you know, I was using foliar feeds with those trace minerals in. I was amending those trace minerals every so often. Like, I really thought I was staying on top of it. Nope. That plant sap analysis said, wrong.
Yeah, and that is one thing. I get it. It costs money to have a soil test done. But from my experience with doing it, I should get to doing it here. I just haven't been as organized. But when I was doing them, it did increase yield and it paid for itself. It wasn't a cost. You know what I mean? And you're top dressing anyway, and it was like trying to guess that. But I haven't been trying to reuse the media for a while, and that's where I think it's really important is when you're, because you can mix the soil and you can try to re-amend, but it's like all of a sudden you get to like 5-6 rounds in, and it gets really, you might have some weird thing pop up, and it's really hard to know
so-
where you're at. You know what I mean, as far as balanced soil.
So using cover crops in a no-till bed, your cover crops are going to pull out different amendments, put it back in the nitrogen cycle or the nutrient cycling. But when plants start to become depleted, or your soil becomes depleted in it, where is your no-till beds getting some of these nutrients put back into it, like calcium and silica? Like, we are going to have to add some of this over time if our plants or diversity and cover crop is not pulling it and making it available by putting it in the biomass and pulling it out of the soil.
Right. Well, a lot of the biology too needs that in the soil food web. Like almost every level of that, they need all those things like calcium and all that too. So I mean, they're constantly going to be mining it from the soil, from those soil sources. But like you say, yeah, you got to keep in mind that how much you're returning back to the soil versus pulling out of the, as far as biomass that you're pulling off from the soil too.
Well, a lot of like we know that we put in excessive nitrogen. We don't need that much. We have so much available already. But the phosphorus paradox, like Dr. Christine Jones talks about, it's there. We dump so much phosphorus, but it's not available, that we need to figure out how to make it available for our plants. Same thing like using buckwheat. Buckwheat makes it available as a cover crop that you can put, like
Oats is excellent.
We need to teach some of it.
Oats is excellent for phosphorus too. And, hey, potassium. Let's not forget what a potassium hog cannabis can be.
Yeah, oats and buckwheat were two of the cover crops that I settled on after running a bunch of different mixes. Like Eagle was pointing out, that the clovers can draw a lot of pests, but the buckwheat and the oats really didn't seem to draw a lot of weird pests. And I know that it was a John Kemp talk. He had those listed as far as like creating an overall reducing effect on the soil, so it's pumping energy into the soil is my takeaway from that, versus some plants can actually, draw energy from the soil and not put something back in to benefit it.
Yeah, and it depends. Again, it's like this is always in context of where your soil's at, what plants you're growing, what your climate is. Like there's so many factors here that like affect that too. Just always got to remember it's always in context. It's working within the system as a whole, and remembering what all those pieces of that system are and how they interact with each other.
There's that N in chat dropping them information again on phosphorus.
Yeah, it's a huge takeaway to realize that the balance is how important that balance is. Like even the calcium to magnesium to potassium, those ratios play a big role in the plant's ability to uptake and do a lot of other processes.
And that applies to both sides of the spectrum, both the cation and the anion side of the spectrum.
Thanks for stopping by, and possibly Nick from Rooted Leaf.
I said it was, I think I did.
That was an awesome info bomb there.
And so a lot of us, go into carbon, back to soil biology. Like how many of these biological processes that the soil, living soil food web, actually help to break down nutrients, but the plant can't take them up. So another biological process has to happen for the plant to then uptake these nutrients. Like, it happens quite a bit and more often than what we think and understand. And some of us don't get that when we talk about diversity in biology and why it's so important.
And that's where fungi play a massive role when it comes to carbon, because fungi are the digesters of the digesters of the digesters, right? They'll keep digesting and digesting and digesting whatever they can over and over until they can't digest it anymore. And at that point, what you have is 38 to 48% lipophilic acid, which is a fat. So once again, how is nature storing excess energy in an efficient form? It's in a fat. It's always in a fat.
So I'm kind of back to my question earlier. So if you're thinking about putting together a long-term bed, something you're going to have for years, what is the best way to, think ahead and keep a best carbon source in there? Is it just, you know what I mean, cover crop, the old chop and drop, or can you bank ahead? Like, that's pretty much kind of what a Hugel system is kind of banking on, right? So
Yes.
they're banking ahead in that. So can you bank ahead kind of in a bed? You know what I mean? Is there a way to biochar log something that, I want 10 years out of this bed?
Well, think about it. You're going to have to add some good wood type mulch to that bed. You're not going to get it naturally from any soil or amendment. You're going to actually have to put wood chips or wood mulch, fibrous mulch in there. That's one of the ways you can add your biochar to help get it charged up a little bit for the biology. But what we're trying to do is put food sources in there for the biology to break down and make it available for plants. So if you're talking about supercharging your soil and getting it ready, yeah, I mean, that's what super soil is, right? You're supercharging your soil full of different amendments, making them available 30 to 45 days, and then you start to use the soil to, put your plants in.
I would say in the long term, I would think to picture how the moisture is going to flow through that and how it's going to hold water. Think about how things are going to break down and compact as you're going to go along, and to try to, as far as nutrient level, still need to picture it as nutrient cycling and not necessarily like having a level. And if you're looking at it in that sense, then you're just trying to maintain like a balance of some of the nutrients so that the biology can maintain and function in the proper way. But yeah, it's nutrient cycling is the idea if you're running long term, not necessarily like
So
adding
Nutrient.
look at your hugelkultur you were bringing up. Okay, you're adding big chunks of wood, logs, trees. Some of them are chopped up, some of them are left long. You're adding as much leafy material, as much like food scraps that you can into this bed, and then covering it with soil and kind of letting it start to break down over a year time before you can use it. It's helping keep moisture in the bed, especially in desert areas. So you're doing what you're talking about. You're creating a setup for nutrient cycling.
Is there some woods that are better than others, or some that may be toxic to cannabis in the long run?
Well, with it being a dynamic accumulator, you can have certain pesticides or shit in the soil, if you're not being aware of it, that could be harmful. But if you know where the sources are coming from, I don't think it would.
Someone's just, from being a carpenter, naturally secrete, oils and stuff like that I'm wondering if buried may be detrimental to the mycology. or even the
For
plant.
sure, like the black walnut and shit like that is for sure.
For
Those
sure.
are some obvious ones you want to stay away from. I've kind of heard the broad stroke of like some of the nutted trees.
Say
But
that you say that and mainly because I wouldn't think I would throw a hunk of black walnut as carpenter in the ground just because it's friggin' black walnut. Not necessarily that
yeah,
it does have oils and stuff in it, but the same aspect you might be like, okay, that's the one. You know what I mean? I hate to part with this beautiful black walnut, but this is like gold if I drop it in the ground.
no,
But
but you know what I'm saying. Like even like the sawdust or the whatever. But those are some to avoid. Even like some of the other ones that might even people have even mentioned. So what was it? Like it was a nut plant too. Maybe it was another walnut.
well,
And that
look
was
at
Cedars are cedars bad? Yeah, I think I've seen it mentioned in
I've
chat.
heard the cedar was the other nut.
yeah, cedar is
say,
like cedar's supposed to keep bugs away and pests away.
Any-
But
anything in the
that's
cedar family, anything in the fir family, I would say don't add that to your soil for anything because that's going to totally disrupt your soil biology.
not necessarily, because I have cedar mulch in my front yard that's real fibrous, and I have all kinds of fungus popping up, and it's not just one species, it's several species. So it may be different, like biological entities that will only go after those sources, such as we know that there are bacteria that now break down plastics and consume plastics. For years, we thought nothing would ever break down plastics. Here we now have some bacteria that are consuming it. So I would say that it may be detrimental to some, but not everything.
Fair enough, but I would say like it as far as like spruces and like pines and that kind of stuff, you don't want to put that stuff down. Pine maybe more, but spruce, man, I put spruce down on a cover crop area one year, and it was like 3 years. It just wiped that biology out and changed that whole soil dynamic. And I had
It might be more fungus based, because if you look at Amanita, they like to grow around pine fir trees. Okay, you have still biological processes happening, but grasses, weeds, they don't grow around pine or spruces. Same thing as certain mustards. Mustards put off a toxic in the soil that kind of kills other biological plants around it and can be toxic. So there are some things that can be detrimental or invasive versus others, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess this would take us back to a point about like if you're mixing a soil up, or even if you're just building your soil beds, always find good quality material, good sources of carbon, good sources of manure. If you're going to use manure, use that targeting correctly. Don't overdo it. Always look for the best quality, right? Like garbage in, garbage out, good in, good out. Like you can't make it better than it was on the other side. Soil can do a lot of recycling and digesting, but let's not just shoot ourselves in the foot from the start.
And when we mean by looking at some of these sources, some people can get compost from local municipals that are making it, but you have to then look at the pharmaceuticals, the pesticides, and some of these that people don't know that are in them. If you look at
compost from municipalities, garbage compost, and way nitrogen level.
Well, and look at some of the drinking water coming out of these municipals, even being treated, are high in pharmaceuticals. So we have to be aware of a lot of this stuff and looking at the resources that, if we don't want these toxins entering in it, we really have to pay attention.
Well, yeah, I would kind of think there is when you're talking about compost like that, as Smiley was saying earlier, different inputs have different carbon chains. So some of them, I know my local compost will take anything, cardboard, all kinds of shit. You know what I mean? So how good are the actual carbon chains that you're actually getting there? Is you putting twice the work into it or whatever? But I want to kind of get back to the composting for yourself, though. You know what I mean? Is there a sweet spot? Like, I know, like oak leaves. You were talking about certain nitrogens and shit. Pine needles are sort of high in nitrogen. Oak leaves are high in nitrogen. Yeah, if you're thinking about like putting a compost together for cannabis, now are we getting to, I'm sourcing out this much, oak leaves or pine needles and, you know what I mean? Better, longer change to the compost pile, not just, okay, yeah, I'm making compost, but now are we gearing it to, longer chains and shit like that, may be even more beneficial and geared towards our individual use of that being cannabis? I mean, can we compost with a specific plant in mind or recipe in the long run?
Well, I think in a lot of ways that's what you were doing with the super soil too. As you were mixing it, you were letting it go through the heat cycle for that 90-day wait period or whatever, and then by the time you were really planting the plants into it, it had already kind of gone through a composting cycle.
But with that being said, again, I'm thinking back to the bank. You know what I mean? The super soil, when I used it, and I used it for a very long time, I've been burned. I got burned from getting into hot batches and didn't have no. All right. But in
So
that
that's the problem.
aspect, I used hot soil on purpose. Just a lower phase in the pot with like a buffer medium, knowing that sooner or later it would get into that little bit more hotter, more, off balance, more charged level soil.
So if you use your super soil earlier, you're going to have what we call a hot soil, which means it's temperature wise, the biological processes are just like compost, still heating it up, and your root zone's trying to grow into that. And it's going to cause some problems with some plants, not necessarily everyone. Some of them can deal with it, some of them can't. But if you let it go 45 days or longer, most of the biology is, how do I want to call it? It's established, even though it might be in a suspended animation where they're not quite alive until you rehydrate them. So if you let your soil sit for 6 months, most of that biology that started within the first 30, 45 days is going to kind of die off from no food. I mean, they've consumed a lot of it. They're just going to be in a suspended animation at that point, that you're just going to have your super soil and kind of like not a lot of biology.
That's when I
The
think
whole point is
a soil that's hot. I understand that there's a temperature factor there, but I'm thinking of there just being a source there that isn't bioavailable yet, that will be, a little bit later in the plant phase. That's kind of what I mean by getting ahead and putting a hot soil towards a hotter, soil towards the bottom of my plant. I do understand it's technically getting hot, but when I think about putting it ahead, I'm kind of thinking about banking ahead for later on in the plant's life too.
if we're top dressing, isn't that kind of like making a super soil? We're adding these amendments to the top of it, scraping it in, letting it break down, do the process. Yeah.
I was gonna say, that's like more in alignment with like the Korean natural farming concept, where you're putting your compost on top of the soil, and then as irrigation and rain falls in, it's carrying like the nutrients in slowly. And also, John Kemp's talked about the biology being able to reach right up to the very top of that detritosphere and grab nutrients straight from it if it needed it.
Well, that's like sip containers. You just water from the bottom, put all the food on top. It's not getting into a lot of the rhizobiums, the root zone, and be making it hot, even though the top part of the soil is now, where all the activity is, it's not down where the roots are going down. So it's a little different on how it affects plants.
So when you have a newer soil, as you water, can it actually like push down, nutrient rich spots in the soil and it actually leads down, and maybe so towards the lower part of the soil, you get a nutrient buildup of sorts because, like you're saying, we're kind of almost watering it out or pushing it out with every watering. As you pointed out earlier, it seeps down further and further into the soil, but when we're in pots, can it build up, or are we just watering it straight out the bottom, or is it a toxic? Can be a toxic area, that inch or two where water may sit stagnant and nutrients may build up in that bottom layer where your roots kind of sit.
So just as something to consider here, that does bring to my mind that anionic and cationic nutrient thing, right? Again, where you have some nutrients are soluble and some aren't, right? So you got the soluble nutrients. Like ideally, if we make a good organic soil mix, we have nutrients that are available in that soil and available to exchange sites for biology, but not soluble, so it's not leaching out. So I guess I just wanted to make a point about that. And I lost another train of thought on it, but
Well, a lot of it's held in the biology of the soil food web. Having proper soil nutrient cycling is involved with having all the levels of the soil food web kind of working. So that's one of the concepts, I guess, when you're looking at living soils and maintaining them over the long term. In my mind, that was always trying to get that nutrient cycling, that whole engine, so to speak, really running and really keeping up with the demands of the plant. Anytime that, like, when I was kind of talking with Scott Games about some of the stuff, but when anytime there was like a deficiency, he didn't necessarily look at it as like, oh, we got to correct it by adding something, other than he always looked at it through the eye of like the biology is off. We need to figure out how to correct the biology that's going on. And some of it was, in a lot of cases, it was watering. And all I was really doing was correcting my watering practices to get it in a way that the moisture content would be maintained to support the soil food web functioning, and the whole nutrient cycling can happen. And a lot of that's dependent on that water. So like when you were talking earlier, Matt, about this super soil and some of that stuff going into like a stasis, like the moisture content can really matter too. So if you watered that super soil mix when you first initially mixed it, or wherever you brought some moisture up to it, or maybe you didn't, maybe, sometimes it'll kind of draw in some moisture even on its own, but that thing will heat up regardless. But if it dried out totally, that could have been the cause of it cooling down and the biology stopped working, versus it actually processed all the energy source that was there for it. So like then you go to use it, you transplant your plant into it and you water it, is all that stuff's going to come alive because it's got the moisture and it's got the energy source still, and it could heat up again. So that's just one scenario that could have caused something like that, where you thought we had it good and then it still kind of burnt it.
I want to jump in a little bit on this a little bit. So not necessarily what you're talking about, Smiley, which is great information. I'm jumping in on chat conversation because this is something I've talked about recently, and I've talked about it in the past. Cannabis is a very much a super easy plant to grow. You know what I mean? If you want the simplicity, of growing an easy plant, cocoa, artificial nutrients, you can grow amazing plants. But this conversation and what we're talking about is organics, which is a more way deep process that involves everything, including yourself. You know what I mean? Even myself, I have had up to the great pleasure of meeting my good friend Smiley, had not a whole lot of give a shits about what actually happened in the soil. You can Ricky Bobby a plant all you want. You know what I mean? Get in that driver's seat, gets you some good fucking artificial nutrients and grow some big, amazing plants. But it isn't until you want to open up your mind and dive into the soil and how it works and how the root process, the rhizosphere, and all that shit works that this becomes a conversation. And so this is, the plant itself is an easy plant to grow, but we're talking organics here, which is it can be a very technical subject, but it's a fascinating subject. And by having these conversations, we're all kind of wrapping our minds around it. For me, it was kind of a basic process. For me, the whole process of microbes opened my mind up and fascinated me, or started to fascinate me with organics. So yes, I agree with Flyby in the fact that this is a plant. You can just grow it. You can overcomplicate it as well. But this is talking about a serious level of growing in organics. We're talking longevity here. You know what I mean? Doing things for the right reasons in a sustainable purpose. So, yes, in both aspects. This is a weird world, the organics, and we're here to learn a little bit higher level of how things are trying to. But then again, I agree with Chad too. It can be a very simple plant to grow. But if we want to open up your mind and learn some shit and take it to a deeper level, quit hating in chat and open up your mind. That's all I'm gonna say about that shit. So,
and a lot of people don't seem to understand
for showing up and dumping this shit in here, because I'm still very much in the learning phases. I'm not gonna bullshit nobody in saying that when it comes to organics, as this process goes on, I am very much in the learning seat here. I will most certainly be the guy that's asking questions on the panel and learning as I go along. So, you know what I mean? I appreciate what you guys do in the community 100%, that take this to another level and appreciate the organics, because, it isn't always an easy thing. Easy isn't always the best. You know what I mean? Cheapest isn't always the best. You know what I mean? So I appreciate the level you guys take, in putting this information out, taking the time to learn it, you can explain it to us in a way that we can find relevant. So, I just wanted to say thank you guys, because I see, the shit, the negativity coming a little bit, but I want to say, don't let that shit affect you guys, man. I appreciate it. And you got to take the 1% out and appreciate the 99% that are watching right now and going, thank you. I've got talking points for the future.
The one thing that I want to say real quick is a lot of people forget this is about weed nerds. We're here to discuss deeper conversations than just growing a plant. That is for other different channels. And we go a little deeper diving for people that want to be a little more educated and take a deeper dive. And that's why we call ourselves weed nerds, because we're really into the plant physiology and biology, as well as the soil biology and how it all works together. And if people don't want to learn that, that's perfectly fine. They don't have to sit here and listen to the conversation. They can go elsewhere, but they want to sit here and listen to the conversation. Most people want this information, and that's why they're here in chat. If they didn't want to be here, they didn't have to be. And so when you have one person come in and just ruin it for the rest of them, like us, we just kind of ignore it and blow it off. And like, whatever, you want to be a troll, that's fine. But we're here for information, and we're going to keep talking to this information. Whether you agree or not, we're still going to do what we do because we're weed nerds.
Just like there's many ways to get to work. You can walk, you can ride your bike, you can drive a Camaro, you can jump on a Ducati. Well, we're going to get on a Ducati. That's what we want. So come along, or see you later.
You can feel free to ask questions too. I didn't mean to disrupt the tone of the show. I just wanted to throw that out there because that's honestly a subject And Smiley, you know, 100%. We've had this conversation about like overcomplicating it for the average grower. But yeah, organics, like it or not, is not a fucking easy subject. It can spiral down to confusing very quickly. So, again, I appreciate you guys for taking the time to fucking explain it in ways that are more easable, more understandable than, some of this book terminology.
And that's what we discussed last time was the more you hear information being repeated, the more easier it is for you to pick up and start to understand. And you have several different people or different channels talking the same talk, the same information, more people start to pick it up and start putting 1 + 2 = 3 together and understand, oh, okay, they're talking about this and they were talking about this. Let me look into this. And oh, now I have a better understanding. Like that's the whole point of why our channels do what we do.
Okay, and we've addressed the issue, and I'd love to just leave this behind. And the next time we have a troll, everybody knows what page we're on, and we're just going to keep talking and ignore them because we've given this way too much freaking airtime, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess where were we? Do we want to take questions? Are you guys open for chat questions? Does chat have questions for anything that's been said tonight? There's one right there. What do you think about the Coots mix? Everybody loves the Coots mix, right?
It's very simple. It's for a new grower to really start with. I believe that 100%. Like there is no reason to even not try it if you haven't tried organics. I would try that before I would try some of these super soil recipes just to get an understanding of how it works.
Absolutely. Just like starting anything else. Start small. Start out, get the hang of it, start to get a feel for it, then work your way up.
And see, over time, I have a lot of people ask me, well, how much, what amendments should I use? How much of this or how much of that? My response is try it yourself. Figure out a recipe that works for you. I can give you a baseline to try, but you're going to add some stuff over the years that you see that you want to put in and see how well it works. And so I can't really give you a specified answer for that when you ask. I can be like, try this and try this, but I'm sure you're going to add some other stuff or take some stuff away because you might like it or not like it. Like a lot of people we talked about back guano. I don't use it because I don't like how it makes my flour taste. People still use it. That's like one of those incidents.
And also, let's not forget, always in context, my environment's probably totally different from your environment. The plants, the strains that I'm growing are probably totally different. They probably have different nutrient demands. I've seen huge, huge variations in nutrient demand between different strains.
Chat's crazy. So, any questions? The questions have already took us off of what we talked about. Is there any questions about carbon to nitrogen? Is there any questions about tonight's topics that we've talked about? We're open for new subjects for future shows.
Yeah, we do got. I don't know, man. It is a tough one to come up with all the time. It's like, what are you gonna keep talking about? So I don't know. I'm just trying to have something to talk about today.
That's the bad thing. Like I've been on YouTube for over 10 years and I hate to regurgitate information, but that's the one thing Sup got upset about. Some people like, you should know, you should be on our level. Somebody would ask a question, he would get upset and kind of snap at them. It's regurgitating the same information, and it's hard for channels to keep putting out the same all the time. So it's like, how do you make it interesting and fun to keep putting it out?
I think that's the power amplifier we have here with this panel. We got a huge amount of knowledge. You have knowledge I don't have. I have knowledge you don't have. Eagle's got killer questions. We got a chat full of people who will continue to ask questions. And I think this is going to evolve something well beyond what we ever dreamed it could be, actually. I think right now we're kind of reaching like, well, where do we go next? but I'll bet this blows up into something that teaches us all something on another level. That's what I hope.
Well, we have a lot of states still coming online for medical, recreational. People are learning to grow their own, and they want the information. And videos from 10 years ago has different information than what today has, because it doesn't have the information as what today does. That's why we keep putting out some of this information. Like, we didn't know about phagy-cycle until just like 2-3 years ago. And so that information has recently been coming out a lot more about what's happening. But when I first started making videos about soil food web, that was not even discussed.
Yep. And that science keeps it, like right now, especially, that science is evolving at a phenomenal rate. And like you say, like stuff that was relevant 10 years ago is like, there's a new context to that information. Like the stuff that I learned 10, 15 years ago, now I'm like, oh, as I go along, it's like, oh, that's why this and this and this piece work like that. That all makes sense now in this whole bigger model of how that system works.
There's a question by Envy Closet Megro, and what is the difference between fungal tea and nutrient tea? Also, any good recipes for brew teas that you guys want to share? Smiley, you got any?
I can share some experience.
I'm sorry, man. I was on mute and it was like on chat, and I got to flip pages and it wouldn't. Anyway, so teas. I mean, I messed around with teas for a while. I had the bubblers and all that, made poop soups and different stuff. And there's effects that can happen. I mean, a lot of times depends what inputs you're putting into them. But the more and more I did it, the more I dialed it back to doing getting an active compost of some type, and worm casting, or biocomplete compost, but getting a good compost source and then just rinsing it through a screened bag or a nylon, and just rinsing it in the bucket, not even bubbling it, but just watering it directly on the plant, stir the soil right from there. And I mean, it's quick and easy, and I kind of got lazy about it, so I haven't really done the whole tea thing. Well, I guess this summer I did do one tea with alfalfa. I got the alfalfa.
Try count now.
Yep, and then I soaked the alfalfa pellets overnight, and it made the water really brown, almost looking, and green. And I just pulled those out. They were like in a strainer bag too. So I pulled out the plant material.
So you were
that water that was there, and then I just poured that onto the plants. But that I cut that, and I didn't pour it straight. I actually, because I've fucked around with some of the alfalfa stuff, and that trichanthanol is no joke, man. It will really, it can actually mess shit up if you're really going about it. So. Yeah,
well,
I did cut that, but other than that, I haven't really gone about bubbling nothing or anything in a while.
So that's like a seed sprout tea where you're using it to get some of the enzymes off of it.
Yeah, the seed sprout teas really do work. That's something. They're kind of a pain in the ass and whatever, so I haven't done them in a minute either. But it's really did do. You do see a plant response from them, so.
They are a nice boost. And, I would say I messed around with teas a lot years back, and I found the same thing. Like, and let me just to back out and look at it from a bigger picture. Like, what are we doing making teas? We're trying to mimic what's going on in the soil. Why aren't we just doing that in the soil? Because if we can get that tuned, then we don't have to do all this monkeying around. I had a friend who had 55-gallon drums, and he went out and bought like super high capacity air pumps that he was just going ape shit 24 hours a day trying to make teas. And like, they got some pretty cool results with it. But like at the end of the day, it's like, man, let's work with what works. One thing I will say, there's preparation, a biodynamic preparation that I found worked really, really well. It's like comfrey and chamomile and I forget, there's like 2 or 3 other ingredients, and it goes into a tea and it ferments over time. And I found that worked really good, but I also found it was super, super, super potent. And basically I would take like maybe a pint of that to say 15 gallons of water and use that as a foliar feed. And if I want any stronger than that, I got negative effects out of it. So that's my 2 to 5 cents.
I do a lot of amendment teas for the solubility. I see great results after feeding my plant teas, not just from the nutrients, but from the biology that is created when the tea is brewing, because I'll use different things that have like trichoderma or different bacillus, different glomalin, different, types of biology to it. So when it's brewing, some of these, like a great one is Mammoth Peat. They say when you're making a tea or adding it in a watering, not to put it in till the end, because they'll multiply so quickly, they'll consume a lot of what's in the deal. So you have to watch some of these teas and the biologicals you're putting into it, because it can consume a lot of, but you want that to break down. So there's positives to this, but I'll do basically amendment teas, some seed sprout teas. Sometimes I'll do straight alfalfa. Sometimes I'll do horsetail, where I'm soaking horsetail and kind of letting it break down. So I've done different styles. As for fungal tea, though, I don't do just a fungal tea. I don't believe just fungus is all my plant needs. So I try to do more than just fungal. I try to do, like I said, some trichoderma, some bacteria, some type of lactose, because lactose and trichoderma really consume a lot and take over a lot of the soil. And so that's the 2 I really want to use to really help make nutrients available.
And to your point, it's kind of hard to keep that balance of bacterial and fungal in a tea. Like, you don't have that porosity of the soil there for all those other, like you're not giving it the best environment.
Well, some people say when you're brewing teas, you're actually creating an aerobic zone in the tea. And so you're getting aerobic biology. That's not a bad thing, people. Lactobacillus is aerobic, anaerobic. They can live in both conditions. They're mainly anaerobic though. So there are a lot of anaerobic bacteria that are beneficial. They're not all harmful. And so it's a balance that you're looking for from it more than anything.
So you bring up the lactobacillus there, and I heard you mention, kind of watering in with milk as well. I've heard of people a lot watering their cannabis plants with milk. Is that a good way to kind of boost the soils?
Yes. So you have to watch the amount of milk in a ratio, but definitely either preferably raw or organic, low pasteurized, not high temp pasteurized. You want those good fats, you want those minerals, you want that bacillus, those strains and sugars to stay in there and not be cooked out of it. Farmers used to dump milk on their fields because it was going bad. They didn't drink it fast enough. And the production they got from the sugars in the milk and the lactose bacillus alone, there's a lot of research on it that people over time have gotten beneficial uses, but they're talking about using it twice a season, once in the beginning and once at end. So that way it gives it time to work its way through the system and not saturate it.
And what are we back to with raw milk again? Once again, living cultures,
biology. Yes,
like the biology.
Me myself, I've never really messed around with a whole lot of teas, like an earthworm casting slurry. I messed around a little bit with some happy endings tea at some point. I just, being in a smaller space that I'm living close to, brewing stuff never seemed to be appealing to have, shit extra. Again, I'm thinking of bug pressures too. Is that inviting to, bring that in? And I don't even
actually,
a Is how easy when it comes to brewing teas and stuff? I mean, is it possible
So
to brew a tea that's for like small scale? You're brewing like 4x4 teas. And
yeah, you're just reducing the amendments in the amount you're using for a smaller amount. So
one
when it comes back,
let me cut you off before real quick. The
yeah.
one thing that I do water into my plants. I wouldn't consider it tea. I mean, I guess maybe. I mean, it was a live plant that was beat up at one point. Is my hash water. My plants respond amazing to my leftover hash water because I don't like to reuse my water between washes. So I get a lot of cannabis, a little bit of cannabis, and I set that aside in like a 20-gallon tote. You know what I mean? And I like to let that set aside for overnight and then the next day feed that to my plants. And it's got to be a beautiful source of nitrogen because after every watering of hash water, them girls pray, 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 pray. So it may not fall into the tea category, but I'll tell you what, if you make hash and you can't do it, I wouldn't suggest doing it too late in flower either. You know, maybe 4 or 5 week or veg. Yeah, the hash water, your plants will love it. But no, as far as teas and shit like that or fungal teas, no, not much experience there.
So I'll answer Val Pothead's question in a second, but back to garden. Eagle, so using milk also helps to fight powdery mildew when you spray it on your plants, like the lactobacillus will help fight off powdery mildew. Going your teas, it's not about the amount of nutrient solubility in it. It's about even trace amounts are beneficial. Going to your hash water that you cycle, think about the flavonoids and terpenoids that are left over in that water, as well as each resin gland that has bacteria in them, because resin glands are known and been found to have bacteria in them. So you're feeding your plants a basic biological tea.
And let's not leave out that leaf surface. That is the phytoplane. That is where rhizobacter are supposed to be, fixing nitrogen directly to the leaves. Okay, so we get all that good biology on there, and then you go recycle it like that. Maybe you're recycling biology again more than you are anything else. Maybe we're back to that again. Let's remember, John Kempf always says biology is the trump card over anything else in the soil.
So back to Val Pothead's question about, can I touch on aerating safely for microbes? There's different types of air stones that aren't real harsh that just help circulate water, but there are other emitters like oxygen emitters that are a better choice, that kind of like, it's an electrode that sends a frequency that emits off oxygen into the water. So it saturates the water more heavily than air stones and air pumps do. Those would be some of the better choices to do. Anything that's really harsh, like a stir stick, that's really abrasive, that's what's going to cause more damage to the biology, trying to build the glues that they stick together with. And so that's where, like, when I'm making a tea and I get this froth and foam, I know the biology's building up in that area. But if I go in and start stirring it around, I'm now disturbing it and breaking it up. So it's not bad thing to till, break them up so they're smaller so they can go in. But honestly, you're trying to keep the colonies together as much as possible, because a teaspoon has millions of biology, bacteria and fungus to it, and we don't understand that. I mean, we think that, oh my God, this whole big bucket, there's billions in your bucket. Hopefully that answered your question.
Crickets, guys.
Smiley's laughing about picking his nose or something.
Cheddar about thought I had a cool thinker pose. So Pondering is probably the better word there.
Smiley does have similar glasses there in chat. Guess Ed. You're like, put my glasses on you and you could be a professor. You have glasses. You look like a professor too when you came on. You've wore them before.
Yeah, I think I have one before. Yep.
So that's the first thing in chat that I've actually been waiting for a glasses comment. This is day 2 of the glasses. That's the first thing I've even seen commented in chat about glasses.
I'll say you look spiffy, Eagle.
I'm not used to it. It's still waning on me, I guess.
If you could pull off an English accent, we'd believe you about anything. You could tell us anything, and we'd believe it.
Like yourself as Sean Atwood.
Oh god, man! I can't believe we did it. We did make it to 2 full hours gauntlet this week. I promise. Next one, I'll have more structure. We'll work on this.
Haven't been too bad. We've kind of stayed on topic and coming back to topic many times, so it hasn't been too bad.
Right on. No, you guys. Thank you guys again. I've thanked you a couple of times, but I really appreciate you guys for hanging out and dumping the knowledge that you guys do into the community. You have for quite some time, Eddie. Smiley, you've definitely carved your own niche in the cannabis community as far as knowledge with the takeover and all the information that you've dumped into the community. And the Future Seed Network, I'm looking forward to very much. I can see you're a stone we need to flip over and, see what's under there as well. I'm looking forward to what the future holds for the Wormhole 2.0 and seeing where this goes. I know there's a lot of people waiting to jump in and participate in the future. And again, if you guys, this isn't necessarily a nailed down thing. If there's, something that you'd like to see covered in the future, please, throw that shit down. We'll follow the leads wherever you guys want us to take this. If you would like to chime in on a future show, hit me up. Let's make that happen as well.
Eagle, we already got a demand for more cowbell.
Maybe towards the end of the show, we'll have a random dab cowbell. How about that?
I think we could do that too, or we, eventually bring in other guests. And so I have mentioned it to a few buddies I know, and they've shown interest too. But
The one
that to every week or every time, but they definitely want to jump in on one and talk some shit about their little perspective on things. So.
The one thing I would like to see in future episodes is you fuckers smoking weed. Jesus, I was the only one tonight that hit it.
I've been dabbing.
I've 3 already.
I've been dabbing over here.
I was even watching there for a while. I seen a cigarette shut off the brew. I smoked a whole joint and I'm like, man, this is awkward.
Well, I do know this. If I get too heavily medicated, I tend to fucking slip up on shit I'm saying. So I watch how high I get sometimes.
I was going to mention it at the 20 because I lit a joint, and then Jessica come walking down after the 20, obviously, because she was mad that I already had half the joint gone. It's not my fault she missed the 20. Like, I don't know.
But for some of the future guests that we talked about, like I seen you invited Envy, Closet Med Grower, which is a great one. Nick would be an awesome one as well.
Nick, was Nick. And Smiley had mentioned him earlier on when we talked about this. And tonight, mid-conversation, mid-show, I was like, you know what? I've got a source I can reach out. And I threw him, a heads up. We're talking about carbon. Then that's when we seen him pop into chat there. He hit me up. He says, man, I'd love to pop in tonight, but I can't. But, in the future, I most certainly will see you guys. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll see Nick at some point as well. But I think this is, I do believe, this is going to be, good for cannabis in general. I think this will be something that will take off in a big way. And I gotta, I think again, Carlton, for you to throw that out there and hell, I call him a little kick in the ass, even though some people wouldn't call him a kick in the ass. But, ever so often you need a little, hey man, let's do this. Hey man, let's keep that streak going.
Well, that's why when you asked me if I wanted to come join, I'm used to being on the Embracing Organic show. And since Tanasi kind of shut it down and has other things going, like I still want to help out and get out the information and be a part of a panel, because I can do it on my channel, but it's not as fun. I want people to engage with and talk to like we have here. And that's what I love about panels, where you have more than one person putting out information and you're able to receive information back. And that's what's so great about it.
Absolutely. And, having run my own show and broadcast networks and all that kind of stuff, like trying to host that and then have an intelligent conversation on top of it. And I was under a weekly schedule, it's a lot of pressure. I just felt like I was putting out diluted content. Here, this is awesome. This is an awesome conversation. I'm learning, and I'm sure other people are learning. And I just really appreciate the forum and the platform for it, and the awesome co-hosts.
I appreciate you guys wanting to do it, and I appreciate you guys wanting to do it here 100%. It means a lot. It really does. And so, I guess that with that being said, man, it is 9:01. I guess we got to call it at some point, but I'm very much looking forward to episode 3. I got a feeling. I'm not gonna say it, but I got a feeling it may develop into more than a bi-weekly thing at some point. So
I was gonna say we might have to set the timing because I got a wedding on thinking that we'll talk or whatever on Friday, because I got that trip to Texas too.
right on. We'll figure it out. We're gonna keep it rolling one way or another.
Right on. Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Smiley, Carlton, thank you. You guys want to see a shout out? Remind everybody where they can find you, other than here, Instagram, YouTube, all that good shit.
Cheers.
Find me at Medically Fit, Instagram and YouTube.
Abby Smileys _garden on Instagram and YouTube.
The Pharmacy Seeds Network on YouTube and Reboot Agriculture on Instagram. Cheers, all.
Right on. That being said, don't forget to do something nice for somebody. Random acts of kindness do save lives. And with that being said, thank you for watching. We are out of here. Thank you, guys.